Phaistos Disc. In 1700 BC, Minoan craftsmen pressed 241 symbols into a small clay disc on the island of Crete using individual pre-made stamps. That disc has defeated every linguist, cryptographer, and archaeologist who has studied it for over a century. The disc measures just 16 centimeters across. Both sides are covered in symbols arranged in a tight inward spiral divided into 61 segments. What makes it unlike anything else ever found is how it was made. The symbols were not carved or scratched by hand. They were pressed into soft clay using individual pre-made stamps, one for each of the 45 unique signs. That process is structurally identical to movable type printing, a technology the rest of the world would not develop for another 3,000 years. The symbols themselves depict human figures, animals, tools, shields, and plants. They match no known writing system from the ancient world, and no confirmed connection to any other script has ever been established. Over 100 serious attempts at decipherment have been made. Scholars have proposed the disc as a religious hymn, a legal document, a calendar, a game board, and a navigation chart. None of these interpretations have been verified or accepted by the wider academic community. The core problem is simple. There is only one Phaistos disc in existence. Without a second example to cross-reference, there is not enough material for any decipherment to be confirmed. Every theory starts from the same 241 symbols and arrives at a completely different conclusion. Until another disc or related inscription surfaces, the meaning of those symbols will remain completely unknown. It sits in a museum in Crete today, still unread, still unexplained. Bur's Nimrud. In 1842, British explorer Austen Henry Layard came to Mesopotamia to prove the Assyrian Empire existed. He wasn't chasing myths. He wasn't hunting legends. He was a scientist, searching for hard evidence. But buried beneath the windswept desert mounds of modern Iraq, he stumbled onto something that no Victorian mind could explain. A colossal 7-tiered ziggurat. And it wasn't just ruined, it was melted. This is Bir's Nimrud, the structure that many scholars believe was the real Tower of Babel, built around 600 BC by the Babylonians and dedicated to the god Nabu. It once rose over 70 meters into the sky, each terrace clad in brilliantly colored brick, grand, deliberate, and built to last forever. But what Layard found at the summit stopped him cold. Enormous blocks of masonry fused into solid glass. Individual bricks, some 15 feet across, twisted and curled like paper held over a flame. The entire peak split down the center and welded into a single, vitreous mass. And most staggering of all, Nebuchadnezzar's own inscriptions, still perfectly legible, on the melted surfaces. Here is where mainstream science gets very uncomfortable. Vitrifying brick requires sustained temperatures above 1,000 degrees Celsius. A wood fire cannot reach that threshold, not at this scale. Lightning, while extraordinarily hot, lasts a fraction of a millisecond, physically incapable of melting entire walls of solid masonry. 19th century scientists who examined the site personally concluded that no natural or conventional cause that they could identify was sufficient to explain the destruction. Ancient Arabic and Jewish traditions both describe the exact same event: fire descending from the sky and splitting the tower to its very foundation. Benjamin of Tudela, a traveler who visited the ruins in the 12th century, recorded the aftermath himself and wrote of flames that fell from heaven. The vitrified masses sit on that summit today, undisturbed, unexcavated, and unexplained. No formal study has ever produced a published explanation that accounts for both the physical evidence and the sheer scale of what happened here. Whatever reduced this monument to glass was real, and we still have no idea what it was. Aeolipoli. In the 1st century AD, Heron of Alexandria built a device that converted boiling water into continuous rotational motion. 17 centuries before, James Watt was given credit for inventing the steam engine. Heron was a Greek mathematician and engineer working at the Great Library of Alexandria, a man who spent his life documenting the physical principles of the world around him. He had already built automatic doors, a coin-operated vending machine, and a programmable cart. The Aeolipoli, meaning wind ball, was his most consequential creation, and he almost certainly had no idea how significant it was. The device was elegantly simple, A sealed cauldron of water sat over an open fire. As the water boiled, steam rose through two hollow tubes that acted as the pivot axis for a copper sphere mounted above. The sphere had two curved nozzles on opposite sides pointing in opposite directions. As steam filled the sphere and escaped through those nozzles, the equal and opposite thrust of each jet set the sphere spinning on its axis at speed. No pistons, no cylinders, no combustion, just heat, steam, and the reaction force that Isaac Newton would not formally describe for another 16 centuries. The tragedy of the Aeolipoli is not that it failed. It is that nobody ever asked what else it could do. Ancient Greek society ran on slave labor. There was no economic incentive to build machines that replaced human effort. The device was demonstrated in temples as a novelty and documented in Heron's book Pneumatica as a physical curiosity. Then it was forgotten. When Thomas Newcomen and James Watt developed their industrial steam engines in the 17th and 18th centuries, the core principle they relied on, heat converting water into mechanical motion, had already been demonstrated and documented in Alexandria 1,000 years before either of them was born. The Industrial Revolution that reshaped the entire modern world was built on a principle a Greek engineer proved with a spinning copper ball in the 1st century AD, the Antikythera mechanism. In 60 BC, a Roman cargo ship sank off the coast of a small Greek island, carrying bronze statues, gold jewelry, and an object that would not be fully understood for another 2,000 years. The wreck was discovered in 1900 by sponge divers who surfaced alongside marble statues and ancient coins, alongside a small corroded lump of bronze that nobody paid much attention to. 2 years later, a researcher in Athens noticed the lump contained interlocking gears, precision gears with triangular teeth, just like the inside of a clock, in an object built over 1,000 years before clockwork gears were supposed to exist. Inside the device were more than 30 interlocking bronze gears arranged in an extraordinarily complex system of interconnected wheels. A user turned a single hand crank, and the entire mechanism came to life. Dials on the front tracked the position of the sun, the moon, and all 5 planets known to the ancient Greeks. Dials on the back predicted solar and lunar eclipses up to decades in advance and tracked the 4-year cycle of the Olympic Games. The gear teeth were cut to less than a millimeter in size with a precision that modern engineers still struggle to explain using tools available in ancient Greece. For decades after its discovery, mainstream academics refused to accept what it was. The mechanism sat largely ignored in an Athens museum for 50 years, until a British physicist named Derek de Solla Price concluded it was an analog computer, unlike anything from the ancient world. Nothing remotely comparable has ever been found from antiquity. The next mechanical device of similar complexity did not appear in human history for over 1,000 years. Scientists are still decoding inscriptions found inside the fragments. Parts of it remain on the ocean floor. Baalbek megaliths. Around 27 BC, one of the most mysterious construction sites in the ancient world was taking shape in what is now Lebanon. The site is known as Baalbek, and it contains stones so large that no engineer alive today can explain how they were moved. The site was used by the Phoenicians, the Greeks, and the Romans across thousands of years. But the foundation beneath all of their constructions is something none of them appear to have built. 3 enormous limestone blocks, known as the trilithon, form the base of the Temple of Jupiter. Each one is 19 meters long and weighs around 800 tons. They are fitted together so precisely that a piece of paper cannot be inserted between them. 20 feet above the ground. Nobody knows how they got there. In the quarry 800 meters away, 3 even larger stones remain that never made it to the temple. The stone of the pregnant woman weighs 1,000 tons. The stone of the south weighs 1,242 tons. The forgotten stone discovered in 2014 weighs 1,650 tons, making it the largest known carved stone in human history. Engineers estimate that moving a single one of these blocks would require 40,000 men working simultaneously. A block of that length does not offer enough surface area for 40,000 people to place their hands on it. The math does not work. No conventional explanation has ever been confirmed. The Romans were meticulous record keepers. They documented every major construction project across their empire in extraordinary detail. The foundation stones at Baalbek appear in none of their records. Not a single Roman document describes who built the platform they constructed their temples upon. Mark Twain visited the site in 1867 and wrote that a race of gods or giants must have inhabited Baalbek. 150 years of archaeology has not produced a better answer. Ark capacitor. Around 1400 BCE, ancient Hebrews are believed to have conceived what some researchers call the ark capacitor, a theoretical device for electrical storage associated with the legendary Ark of the Covenant. Texts and oral traditions hint that the ark could produce or store energy, and interpretations suggest it may have functioned as an early form of a capacitor. Though evidence is largely symbolic and theoretical, the idea has fascinated scientists, historians, and engineers intrigued by advanced ancient technology. Descriptions suggest the ark consisted of a gold-plated wooden chest containing metal rods or plates, carefully insulated and mounted to prevent direct contact with the hands or environment. Some researchers propose that if the ark were treated as a primitive capacitor, it could store static or induced electrical charges, releasing energy under specific conditions. The high conductivity of gold, combined with the insulating properties of acacia wood, may have created a rudimentary but functional energy storage system. Symbolic references to sparks, lights, and divine energy in ancient texts are interpreted by some as accounts of controlled electrical discharge, though no physical testing can confirm this. Additionally, rituals and precise handling may have acted as safety measures, ensuring energy release did not harm those nearby. If the ark capacitor were functional, it could represent one of humanity's earliest experiments with storing and controlling electrical energy, demonstrating that ancient cultures may have explored practical applications of natural phenomena. The concept merges technology, religion, and legend, inspiring both speculative science and historical inquiry. While no archaeological evidence conclusively proves electrical use, the ark capacitor continues to captivate modern imagination. Its story blends myth and possible technological insight, leaving scholars and enthusiasts alike to wonder whether ancient civilizations had knowledge of principles that would not be scientifically rediscovered for millennia. Alarm clock. In the 4th century BC, Plato built a device that woke his students up every morning using nothing but flowing water, air pressure, and a sound loud enough to pull a person out of deep sleep. Plato was not an engineer. He was a philosopher who ran an academy in Athens and had a very specific problem. His students kept oversleeping, so he built something to fix it. 2 stone vessels stacked on top of each other, one slowly draining into the other throughout the night. By morning, the lower vessel was full, the pressure built, and a narrow opening forced air out through a tube producing a sharp whistling sound that filled the room. It was not adjustable. It was not quiet. It worked. A century later, a Greek engineer named Ctesibius took the concept and rebuilt it entirely. He added a top tank with a precisely controlled overflow valve to keep water pressure perfectly consistent throughout the night. As the lower tank rose, it moved a float connected to a rack and pinion gear system. That gear turned a dial, and at a preset hour released a mechanism that dropped pebbles onto a bronze gong. For the first time in human history, a person could set the exact time they wanted to wake up, and the device would do the rest entirely on its own. No human intervention required between setting it and waking to it. The Romans adopted the design and spread it across the empire. Military commanders used it to coordinate watch rotations through the night. Physicians used it to time patient treatments. Courts used it to limit how long lawyers could speak. A civilization was being scheduled and organized by a water-powered machine built 2,400 years ago. The mechanism Ctesibius designed, a float rising against a calibrated scale, triggering a release at a preset point, is structurally identical to the mechanical alarm clocks that dominated bedrooms across the world until the 20th century. Göbekli Tepe. Around 9,600 BCE, a massive stone complex was built on a hill in what is now southeastern Turkey. Today it is known as Göbekli Tepe, and it is considered one of the oldest monumental structures ever discovered. The site consists of large circular enclosures made from massive limestone pillars. Many of these pillars reach more than 5 meters in height and can weigh up to 20 tons. At the center of each circle stand 2 larger T-shaped pillars, surrounded by smaller ones, connected by low stone walls. What makes the pillars remarkable are the detailed carvings covering their surfaces. Animals such as foxes, snakes, scorpions, birds, and wild boars appear across the stone. Some pillars also show abstract symbols and human-like shapes, suggesting the structures may have had symbolic or ritual meaning. The biggest mystery is who built it. Around 9,600 BCE, humans were believed to live mainly as small groups of hunter-gatherers. Large construction projects like this were thought to appear much later, after farming communities formed permanent settlements. Yet, building Göbekli Tepe would have required careful planning and organized labor. The massive stones were cut from nearby limestone bedrock, then transported and raised into position. Some researchers estimate that hundreds of people may have been involved in the construction. Another mystery is the purpose of the site. Archaeologists have found no houses, kitchens, or signs of everyday living. Because of this, many believe Göbekli Tepe was used as a ceremonial gathering place rather than a settlement. Even more puzzling, around 8,000 BCE, the entire complex was deliberately buried under tons of soil and debris, and the reason for this burial remains unknown. Today, Göbekli Tepe challenges the traditional timeline of civilization, suggesting that large and organized construction may have appeared thousands of years earlier than previously believed. Poison wind. In 178 AD, a Chinese military commander, surrounded by a peasant rebellion with no way out, deployed a weapon nobody had ever seen before. He turned the wind itself into a weapon. Yang Hisuan was the governor of Lingling Prefecture in the Eastern Han Dynasty, facing a large-scale uprising with limited troops and no clear path to victory. His solution was to make the air itself unbearable to breathe. He loaded dozens of chariots with bellows and large containers of fine lime powder, a caustic mineral that when airborne caused immediate choking, blinding, and severe burning of the skin and eyes. The chariots were positioned upwind of the rebel forces, and the bellows were activated simultaneously, driving a dense cloud of lime dust directly into the enemy lines. As the powder engulfed the rebel army, soldiers clawed at their eyes, collapsed to the ground, gasping, and broke formation entirely. Yang Hisuan then drove horses with burning rags tied to their tails directly into the chaos. The uprising was crushed within hours. The account is recorded in the Huhan Shu, the official court history of the Eastern Han Dynasty, making it one of the earliest documented uses of an airborne chemical weapon in recorded history. It is worth noting the historical record comes from a single court document, and independent verification does not exist. What is not in question is that the account describes a sophisticated understanding of wind direction, particle dispersal, and chemical incapacitation that would not appear again in documented military history until the 19th century. Today, the principle of wind-assisted dispersal underpins the design of every airborne chemical weapon ever built since. Flexible glass. Around 14 to 37 CE, during the reign of Roman Emperor Tiberius, a craftsman reportedly presented a material later called flexible glass. According to historical accounts, the inventor demonstrated a drinking vessel that, when thrown onto the ground before the imperial court, dented instead of shattering. The object was then hammered back into shape, astonishing observers accustomed to brittle glassware that normally fractured instantly upon impact. The material was described as a form of treated glass capable of deforming under stress without cracking. Ordinary Roman glass cooled into a rigid, amorphous solid with internal tension, causing it to break when struck. The reported flexible version may have involved modified composition, controlled cooling, or metal-like structural bonding, allowing energy from impact to disperse through the surface rather than forming fracture lines. This would have allowed temporary deformation, followed by restoration of shape, combining transparency with resilience. The craftsman explained the invention to Emperor Tiberius, suggesting widespread practical use in containers and architecture. Such a material could have transformed trade and manufacturing by preventing breakage during transport and daily handling. However, the emperor allegedly feared economic disruption, believing durable glass would reduce the value of precious metals and existing goods. According to the story, the inventor was executed and the technique suppressed, leaving no surviving formula or samples. Historians debate whether the account was exaggerated or symbolic, but no confirmed recreation of the material exists. Flexible glass remains an unresolved report from antiquity, representing a lost technology whose composition and reality remain uncertain. Greek fire. In 672 AD, the Byzantine Empire deployed a weapon that burned on water, stuck to human skin, and could not be extinguished by any means known to their enemies. The weapon was developed by a Greek architect named Kallinikos, who fled Syria and arrived in Constantinople with a formula the Byzantine emperor immediately classified as a state secret. The formula, the delivery system, and the training required to operate it were compartmentalized so completely that even enemies who captured the liquid and the bronze tubes used to deploy it could not replicate either one. The mixture was petroleum-based, most likely crude oil combined with resins, quicklime, and other compounds that scholars still debate today. What made it unlike anything before it was its behavior. It ignited on contact with water rather than being extinguished by it. It clung to wood, rigging, sails, and skin, and continued burning regardless of what was thrown at it. The only known method of extinguishing it was a mixture of vinegar, sand, and urine. Byzantine warships mounted pressurized bronze tubes at their prows that sprayed the liquid in a continuous stream onto enemy vessels. At close range, entire fleets were engulfed within minutes. Soldiers who jumped overboard found the fire followed them onto the water. The psychological effect on enemy forces was as devastating as the physical destruction. Arab naval commanders who survived reported their crews refusing to engage Byzantine warships entirely after witnessing it once. The formula was passed from emperor to emperor as one of the three things that must never fall into foreign hands. After the 13th century Greek fire disappears entirely from historical record, the formula died with the empire that created it. To this day, no chemist or historian has successfully recreated a substance that behaves exactly as the historical accounts describe. One of the most devastating weapons ever deployed in human warfare remains completely unknown: Voynich manuscript. In the early 15th century, an unknown author filled 240 pages of calfskin vellum with detailed illustrations of unknown plants, astronomical diagrams, and naked figures bathing in green pools, all written in a language no person on Earth has ever been able to read. The manuscript dates to between 1403 and 1438, based on radiocarbon analysis of the vellum. It measures slightly larger than a modern paperback and contains 6 distinct sections covering what appear to be botany, astronomy, biology, cosmology, and pharmacy. Every page is illustrated in vivid color. Not a single plant depicted has ever been matched to a known species. Not a single word has been confirmed as belonging to any known language. The writing system, called Voynich, contains around 250 distinct characters arranged into what appear to be words and sentences following consistent grammatical patterns. The words repeat with a frequency and structure that linguists confirm is characteristic of a real language rather than random symbols. Yet every attempt to match it to any known script has failed. World War II, code breakers who cracked Nazi Enigma encryption could not read it. AI decipherment programs trained on hundreds of ancient languages have produced no verified results. Over 100 serious translation attempts have been published. Proposed languages include Hebrew, Arabic, Latin, Nahuatl, and a medieval Proto-Romance dialect. Each claim has been rejected by the wider academic community. The most recent peer-reviewed study published in 2025 demonstrated that a sophisticated medieval cipher could produce text statistically identical to Voynich without containing any meaning at all. That possibility may be the most unsettling of all. The most studied manuscript in cryptographic history might be saying nothing, or it might contain knowledge that nobody alive can access. After 600 years, nobody knows which one it is. Egyptian binary arithmetic. Around 1650 BC, Egyptian scribes were solving complex multiplication problems faster and more accurately than most modern people can do by hand. They were using binary mathematics, 3,000 years before computers existed. The method was documented in the ringed mathematical papyrus, a document copied by a scribe named Ahmes from an even older text dating back to around 1850 BC. It contained 84 mathematical problems with full solutions, showing exactly how Egyptian scribes performed calculations for pyramid construction, land surveying, wage distribution, and grain measurement across an entire civilization. the system worked by breaking every multiplication problem down into a sequence of doublings. To multiply 25 by 7, a scribe would write 1 next to 7, then double both numbers repeatedly down a column, 2 next to 14, 4 next to 28, 8 next to 56, 16 next to 112. Then they would identify which powers of 2 added up to 25 and add only the corresponding values on the right side. 112 plus 56 plus 7 equals 175. The correct answer was reached without ever multiplying directly. This is structurally identical to how binary multiplier circuits inside modern computer processors perform calculations today. Every multiplication your phone or laptop performs uses the same fundamental method. Decompose the number into powers of 2, process each column, and sum the results. The only difference is that a modern processor does it in silicon at billions of operations per second rather than in ink on papyrus. Greek mathematicians, including Euclid and Pythagoras, studied in Egyptian temples and acknowledged that their mathematical foundations came directly from the Nile. The binary logic that powers every device on Earth today was not invented in Silicon Valley. It was written on papyrus in ancient Egypt nearly 4,000 years ago. Stone spheres of Costa Rica. Around 600 AD, the Diqui people of Costa Rica were carving perfectly round stone spheres from solid granodiorite rock, some weighing up to 26 tons, without metal tools, without the wheel, and without any written explanation of why. The Diquis left no written language. Everything we know about the spheres comes from archaeology alone. The spheres were made by hammering natural boulders with other rocks, then polishing them smooth with sand and water. The largest measure nearly 3 meters across and weigh as much as a loaded truck. The rock came from quarries several kilometers away, meaning the builders transported multi-ton stones through dense jungle without wheels or animals strong enough to carry them. The precision of the finished surfaces is extraordinary. Many are so close to perfectly spherical that the deviation from a true sphere is less than the width of a human finger. The spheres were discovered in the 1930s when workers clearing jungle for banana plantations uncovered them buried in the forest floor. Before archaeologists could intervene, workers drilled holes into them, searching for hidden gold, and blew several apart with dynamite. Most were relocated before their original positions could be recorded, making their true purpose nearly impossible to reconstruct. Some remaining spheres have been found aligned with astronomical features, including the position of the sunrise at specific times of year. Beyond that, the purpose and spiritual significance remain entirely unknown. The culture that built them went extinct shortly after the Spanish arrived. There are no myths, no legends, and no stories passed down about why they were made. The people who knew simply stopped existing. Earthquake lights. For centuries, observers have reported mysterious luminous phenomena occurring before or during seismic events, known as earthquake lights. These lights appear as glowing or flickering orbs, streaks, or diffuse glows in the sky, sometimes colored blue, white, or red. Historical accounts from ancient Greece, Japan, and the Americas describe unusual pre-earthquake illumination, suggesting a connection between tectonic stress and atmospheric electrical effects. Scientific investigations indicate that earthquake lights may be caused by electrical charges generated by rock deformation deep within the earth. As tectonic plates grind and fractures form, piezoelectric minerals, or stress-activated ionization, can release energy that travels to the surface, ionizing the air and creating visible light. Observers have reported flashes, sheet-like glows, and moving orbs near fault lines, sometimes moments before tremors. The phenomenon remains rare and unpredictable, making it difficult to study systematically, though modern high-speed photography and sensor arrays have captured some verified occurrences. Earthquake lights provide insight into the interaction between geophysical processes and the atmosphere, revealing how stress in the Earth can manifest as visible, transient phenomena. They also offer a potential, albeit limited, early warning signal for earthquakes. Despite ongoing research, the exact mechanisms and conditions for these lights remain partially understood. The mysterious glow continues to fascinate seismologists and sky watchers alike, illustrating nature's capacity to surprise and hinting at hidden forces at work beneath the Earth's surface. Hattusa. In 1906, German archaeologist Hugo Winkler arrived at a remote plateau in central Anatolia, Turkey, to excavate the ruins of Hattusa, the ancient capital of the Hittite Empire. He expected collapsed architecture and broken pottery, and he found them. But scattered throughout the destruction layer, he also found something that his excavation report quietly noted, and nobody followed up on for decades. Limestone blocks turned to green glass. This is Hattusa, at its peak around 1400 BC, one of the most powerful cities in the ancient world, capital of an empire that rivaled Egypt, home to over 50,000 people, ringed by massive defensive walls stretching 6 kilometers around the city. And then, around 1200 BC, it collapsed with the rest of the Bronze Age world in what historians call the Late Bronze Age collapse, one of the most sudden and complete civilizational failures in recorded history. Here is what the physical evidence actually shows. Sections of Hattusa's defensive walls contain limestone that has been converted to calcium silicate glass, a process requiring sustained temperatures above 1,100 degrees Celsius. Not scorched, not cracked from heat, chemically transformed into green-tinted glass, a process that cannot be replicated by any timber fire, siege weapon, or volcanic event associated with the region. Hittite texts recovered from the site describe a catastrophic fire event that the scribes attributed to divine intervention. The destruction was so complete and so sudden that the city was abandoned mid-occupation, with food still in storage vessels and tools left at workstations. The glazed wall sections were documented, photographed, and then largely left unaddressed in mainstream archaeological literature. An empire that dominated the ancient world for 3 centuries, ended by a fire that turned stone into glass, and a destruction layer that has never been fully explained. Whatever came for Hattusa, it came without warning, and it became hot. Repeating crossbow. In the 3rd century AD, a Chinese military strategist deployed a crossbow on the battlefield that could fire 10 bolts in 15 seconds without stopping to reload. Soldiers who faced it had never seen anything move that fast. The weapon is named after Zhuge Liang, the brilliant strategist of the Shu Han state during the Three Kingdoms period. Historical records credit him with significant improvements to its design, including a version that fired 2 to 3 bolts simultaneously in massed formations. It is worth noting that archaeological evidence dates the original repeating crossbow to the 4th century BC, nearly 500 years before Zhuge Liang. He refined and weaponized it at scale. He did not invent it. The mechanism was elegantly simple. A top-mounted wooden magazine held up to 10 bolts fed by gravity directly into the firing channel. A single rectangular lever connected the bowstring, the magazine, and the trigger into one continuous motion. Pushing the lever forward drew the bowstring back automatically. Pulling it backward released the bolt and loaded the next one in a single fluid movement. One hand, one motion. 10 bolts in 15 seconds without breaking the shooting stance. The weapon had one significant weakness. Its draw weight was considerably lower than a standard crossbow, which reduced penetrating power against armored opponents. Chinese military commanders compensated by coating every bolt with aconite poison. A scratch was enough to kill regardless of armor. The repeating crossbow remained in active military use in China from the 4th century BC through to the 19th century AD, a lifespan of over 2,000 years. It was still documented in combat during the First Sino-Japanese War in 1894. No weapon in human history remained in continuous frontline military service for longer. Lycurgus cup. In 300 AD, Roman glassmakers produced a cup that appears jade green in normal light and glows blood red when light shines through it. Scientists spent decades trying to explain how. The answer turned out to be nanotechnology. Roman craftsmen ground particles of gold and silver so fine they measured just 50 nanometers in diameter, less than 1,000th the size of a grain of salt, and suspended them throughout the glass during the manufacturing process. When light hits the cup from the front, it reflects off the metal particles appearing green. When light passes through the glass from behind, those same particles interact with the light at a different angle, producing a deep glowing red. The effect is called dichroism, and it works because particles at that scale interact with light differently depending on their size. a phenomenon called surface plasmon resonance that modern physics only formally described in the 20th century. What makes it genuinely difficult to explain is the precision. The ratio of gold to silver in the glass is exactly 7:3. That specific ratio is not accidental. It is the precise combination required to produce the color shift. Roman glassmakers had no electron microscopes, no spectral analysis, and no theoretical framework for understanding nanoparticles. Yet they produced them consistently, ground them to the correct size, and mixed them in the correct ratio to achieve a controlled optical effect that modern materials scientists consider an extraordinary feat even today. The cup baffled scientists from the moment it was acquired by the British Museum in the 1950s. The mystery was not solved until 1990, when fragments of similar Roman glass were examined under an electron microscope. Today, engineers are using the same nanoparticle principle from the Lycurgus cup to develop next-generation holograms and medical imaging sensors. A technique mastered 1700 years ago is now driving cutting-edge optical research. Mithridatium. Around 120 to 63 BCE, Pontic ruler Mithridates VI sought protection against assassination by poison, a common threat among rival courts. According to historical accounts, he consumed small measured doses of toxins daily and commissioned a compound later called Mithridatium, intended as a universal antidote. When captured after defeat by Rome, reports claim he attempted suicide using poison but failed, forcing him to order a guard to end his life, suggesting resistance to toxic substances. The formula combined numerous plant extracts, resins, spices, and animal derivatives ground into a single preparation. The principle relied on gradual immunological tolerance. Repeated exposure to sublethal toxins could stimulate metabolic adaptation and detoxification pathways. Some ingredients may have bound poisons chemically, while others induced vomiting, sweating, or accelerated elimination from the body. The mixture was designed to counter a wide range of venoms and toxic compounds rather than one specific agent. The antidote became famous across the Mediterranean. Physicians later reproduced variations, believing it offered protection to rulers and nobles vulnerable to poisoning. Over time, the preparation evolved into complex pharmaceutical compounds used in medieval medicine for both treatment and prevention of toxic exposure. However, the original composition was never precisely recorded, and later versions differed widely. Without controlled testing, its true effectiveness remains uncertain. Mithridatium persists as a historical example of early toxicology and preventative medicine, balancing documented practice with uncertainty over whether broad immunity to poisons was actually achievable. Kailasa Temple. Around 756 AD, builders in Maharashtra, India, began constructing a temple unlike anything that had ever been attempted before. They did not lay a single stone. They started at the top of a mountain and carved downward, removing an entire temple from inside a solid rock cliff, using nothing but hammers and chisels. The Kailasa temple at Ellora was commissioned by Rashtrakuta King Krishna I and is dedicated to the Hindu god Shiva. The temple stands 32 meters tall, is carved entirely from a single basalt rock, and covers an area larger than the Parthenon in Athens. To create it, builders removed an estimated 200,000 tons of volcanic rock from the top down, a method used nowhere else on Earth at this scale. Every pillar, every courtyard, every staircase, and every wall was revealed by removing the rock around it, rather than assembling pieces together. A single wrong cut at any point would have destroyed years of work with no way to correct the mistake. The walls are covered in extraordinarily detailed carvings of Hindu deities, mythological scenes, and intricate decorative panels extending across every surface. A legendary inscription from the time records that even the architect himself stood back when it was finished and asked in astonishment how he had managed to build it. Historians estimate the project was completed in approximately 18 years. Engineers who have studied the site calculate that completing it in that time frame would have required the removal of 5 tons of rock every single day without interruption. With the tools available in the 8th century, no satisfactory explanation for how this was achieved has ever been confirmed. 200,000 tons of excavated rock were removed from the site. Nobody has ever found where it went. Death Valley. In 1931, A prospector named Howard Wilson was cutting through the remote Panamint Mountains on the western edge of Death Valley, California, searching for mineral deposits. He wasn't expecting ruins. Nobody was. The official historical record insisted this region had never hosted any significant ancient settlement. The official record was wrong. What Wilson and subsequent researchers began documenting in the years that followed was a series of stone structures scattered across the high ridgelines of the Panamint Range that didn't belong to any known Native American architectural tradition. Walls, enclosures, foundations, and surfaces that stopped every geologist who examined them cold. The stone wasn't weathered, it was vitrified. Basalt and granite surfaces fused into smooth, continuous glass, in patterns consistent with exposure to sustained, directed heat exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. Not volcanic activity. The geology of the region rules that out entirely. Not desert weathering, which produces erosion, not vitrification. The glazing was structural, running through wall sections and across foundation stones in a pattern that indicated the structures were standing when the heat event occurred. Researcher Charles Happening documented the site extensively in 1947, noting the vitrification was identical in character to the fused hill fort walls of Scotland and the glazed ruins of the ancient Middle East. The same thermal signature, the same absence of any conventional explanation. On a different continent, in a completely different culture, separated by thousands of years. Death Valley is one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth. Whatever civilization built in the Panamint Mountains did so deliberately, at altitude, with sophisticated construction. And whatever ended them left the same calling card found at dozens of sites across the ancient world. Melted stone, no survivors, no explanation on record. Coin-operated vending machine. In the 1st century A.D., Heron of Alexandria built a machine that accepted a coin, dispensed an exact measured amount of a product, and reset itself automatically for the next customer. It was installed in Egyptian temples nearly 2,000 years before anyone thought to put one in a shopping mall. Heron was commissioned by temple authorities in Alexandria who had a very specific problem. Worshippers were helping themselves to more holy water than they were paying for, and there was no reliable way to stop them. Heron built a machine that made the transaction automatic, precise, and impossible to cheat. The device was housed inside a bronze vessel resembling a large decorative urn. A worshipper dropped a coin through a slot at the top. The coin landed on a small pan connected to a horizontal lever, balanced on a central pivot. The weight of the coin tipped the pan downward, which lifted the opposite end of the lever, and pulled open a valve at the base of the water cistern inside. Holy water flowed out through a spout at a fixed rate. As the coin slid off the tilting pan, its weight decreased until it dropped into a collection chamber below. The moment the coin left the pan, the lever snapped back and the valve closed. Every worshipper received exactly the same amount, regardless of how long they stood there. The design required no operator, no priest, and no human oversight of any kind. Insert coin, receive product, transaction complete. The entire logic of modern retail automated into a single bronze vessel in ancient Egypt. The concept sat dormant for over 1,500 years. The first modern vending machine appeared in England in 1883. Today, the global vending machine industry generates nearly $50 billion in annual revenue. Every single machine operates on the same lever and valve principle Heron built in the 1st century A.D. The Aztec Macuahuitl. In 1519, Spanish conquistadors landed in Mexico armed with the finest steel swords in the world. Within days, they were reporting that Aztec warriors had decapitated horses with a single swing of a wooden club. The Macuahuitl had been the primary weapon of Mesoamerican warriors for over 500 years. Its name in Nahuatl means handwood, and at first glance, it looked like nothing more than a large wooden paddle roughly 1 meter long. What made it devastating was its edges. Aztec craftsmen carved precise grooves along both sides of the wooden body and embedded rows of obsidian blades fixed with natural bitumen adhesive. Obsidian is volcanic glass, and when knapped correctly, produces an edge sharper than the finest surgical steel available today. Each blade measured around 3 centimeters long, and together they created a continuous cutting surface combining the slashing power of a sword with the blunt force of a club. Spanish chronicler Bernal Diaz del Castillo recorded witnessing a warrior open a horse from chest to entrails in a single blow. The obsidian edge came with one critical weakness. It shattered on impact with steel plate armor. Once Spanish armored infantry closed with Aztec warriors, the Macuahuitl lost most of its advantage. Combined with horses, gunpowder, and steel, the Spanish armor proved decisive. Not a single original Macuahuitl has survived. The last known complete example was destroyed in a fire in Madrid in 1884. Everything we know comes from Spanish accounts and Aztec codices. Modern cutting tests on reconstructed versions confirm the obsidian edge outperforms steel in sharpness. A wooden weapon built without a single gram of metal remains one of the most effective cutting instruments ever designed. Tall el-Hammam. In 1999, archaeologist Stephen Collins began surveying a massive Bronze Age mound in the Jordan Valley, just northeast of the Dead Sea. He was looking for evidence of ancient trade routes. What his team uncovered over the next 2 decades would become one of the most disturbing archaeological discoveries of the modern era. An entire city, frozen in a single moment of instantaneous destruction. This is Tall el-Hammam, a prosperous, heavily populated urban center that dominated the southern Jordan Valley for over 2,000 years. And then, sometime around 1650 BC, it simply ceased to exist. Not abandoned, not conquered, not burned in the conventional sense, erased. Here is what the excavation found. Pottery sherds with one side melted into glass. Zircon crystals inside building materials can only form above 1,700 degrees Celsius, temperatures found at the surface of the sun. Trinitite-like glass nodules scattered across the destruction layer. Skeletal remains showing no signs of combat, just people, mid-movement, mid-meal, stopped permanently in place. And a total absence of any subsequent occupation layer. Nobody came back. For 6 centuries, the site sat completely empty. The research team published their findings in the journal Nature Scientific Reports in 2021. Their conclusion was that a cosmic airburst event, similar to the Tunguska explosion over Siberia in 1908, but significantly more powerful, detonated directly above the city. The shockwave and thermal pulse were sufficient to vaporize everything within the blast radius instantaneously. The destruction layer is less than a meter thick. Everything above it, gone. Everything below it, intact. One moment, a thriving city of thousands. The next, nothing but glass and ash. And the researchers noted one more detail. The geographic coordinates place Tall el-Hammam directly within the region the Bible identifies as Sodom. Longyou Caves. Deep underground in eastern China lies one of the most unusual man-made sites ever discovered. The Longyou Caves were carved around 206 BC and cover an area so vast that nobody in recorded history ever wrote a single word about building them. The caves were discovered in 1992 when local farmers drained a series of ponds that locals had always believed were bottomless. Beneath the water were not ponds at all, but flooded entrances to 24 enormous hand-carved underground chambers. Each cavern reaches up to 30 meters deep and covers over 1,000 square meters of floor space. The total excavated area spans 30,000 square meters. Every ceiling, every wall, and every pillar across all 24 caves is finished in exactly the same pattern. Parallel bands 60 centimeters wide with precise chisel marks cut at a uniform 60-degree angle. The consistency is so perfect across chambers that were never connected to each other that engineers cannot explain how separate teams working in isolation maintained identical precision throughout. No tools were ever found on site. No debris from the excavation was ever located. 1 million cubic meters of rock was removed, and nobody has found where it went. Scientists estimate that completing the caves would have required 1,000 people working day and night for 6 years. That calculation does not even account for the extraordinary precision of the carving, only the raw volume of rock removed. The actual workload would have been far greater. There are no signs that anyone ever lived in the caves. No cooking areas, no burial remains, no everyday objects. Nobody knows what they were for. The ancient Chinese were among the most meticulous record keepers in history. They documented the Great Wall, imperial palaces, and military campaigns. The Longyou Caves appear in none of it. The seismoscope. In 132 AD, Zhang Heng walked into the Han imperial court and presented a bronze vessel the size of a wine barrel that he claimed could detect earthquakes happening hundreds of miles away. Zhang Heng was a Chinese astronomer and engineer serving under the Eastern Han Dynasty. China at the time was regularly devastated by earthquakes striking remote regions, sometimes weeks before word reached the capital. By the time the emperor knew a disaster had occurred, entire villages had already been lost. Zhang Heng believed he could build a device that would tell the court exactly where an earthquake had struck the moment it happened. The seismoscope stood nearly 6 feet in diameter and was cast entirely from bronze. Around its outer rim sat 8 dragons, each facing one of the 8 compass directions, and each holding a bronze ball in its mouth. Below each dragon sat a bronze toad with its mouth open and waiting. Inside the vessel hung a heavy inverted pendulum on a central fulcrum. When seismic waves reached the device, the pendulum held by inertia remained still while the vessel moved. That difference activated a lever connected to whichever dragon faced the direction the earthquake came from. The dragon released its ball into the waiting toad below with a sharp ringing sound that echoed through the court. The court was skeptical until one morning a dragon facing west dropped its ball with no shaking felt in the capital. Days later, a messenger arrived from a village 400 miles to the west, reporting a devastating earthquake. The seismoscope had detected it before any human being knew it had happened. In 2005, scientists from the Chinese Academy of Sciences built a functioning replica and tested it against 4 real earthquake wave recordings. It detected every single one, with directional accuracy matching modern instruments. The pendulum principle Zhang Heng used in 132 AD remained the foundation of earthquake detection for nearly 1,800 years. Thunder Crash Bomb. In 1231, a Jin dynasty general surrounded by Mongol forces on the Yellow River had no escape route and no reinforcements coming. He reached for a weapon that had never been used in open water before and destroyed the entire pursuing fleet. The Thunder Crash Bomb was developed by Chinese engineers of the Song and Jin dynasties as the world's first documented iron-cased explosive device. Chinese alchemists had been experimenting with gunpowder for centuries, but this was the first weapon to encase that powder in cast iron, transforming a fire-producing mixture into a fragmentation device capable of penetrating armor. The bomb was constructed from a cast iron shell filled with a mixture of saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal. A fuse of adjustable length allowed the thrower to time the detonation. When the iron casing reached its pressure limit, it exploded outward, sending iron fragments in every direction at lethal velocity. The history of Jin recorded that when ignited, it produced an explosion heard 30 miles away and sent fire through iron armor itself. During the siege of Kaifeng in 1232, Jin defenders lowered the bombs on iron, chains down the outer walls onto Mongol miners tunneling beneath the foundations. The leather screens the Mongols had built to protect their workers could not withstand the blasts. The miners were destroyed without a single defender leaving the walls. Contemporary accounts record the Thunder Crash Bomb as one of only 2 weapons that genuinely terrified the Mongols. It traveled west through trade routes and became the foundation for every grenade, artillery shell, and explosive device built in the centuries that followed. Nepenthe. In ancient Greek legend, Nepenthe was a mysterious substance described in Homer's Odyssey as a potion capable of erasing sorrow and grief. It was said to bring forgetfulness of pain, calming the mind and soothing emotional suffering, often administered to those overwhelmed by tragedy or despair. While its existence remains mythological, Nepenthe represents humanity's long-standing desire to find remedies for mental anguish and emotional distress. Accounts describe Nepenthe as a rare elixir, sometimes associated with herbs or exotic origins that could be mixed with wine or other liquids. The potion's effects were portrayed as both psychological and spiritual, alleviating grief while allowing the drinker to regain composure and clarity. Scholars speculate that such references may reflect early knowledge of medicinal plants or psychoactive substances, though the precise nature of Nepenthe was never documented. Its symbolic role in literature emphasizes the cultural importance of coping with loss, trauma, and the human condition, linking myth, medicine, and morality in ancient storytelling. Nepenthe illustrates how myth and legend can encode psychological insight, showing that even in antiquity, people sought methods, real or imagined, to manage emotion and suffering, Its enduring presence in literature and art underscores a fascination with substances capable of altering mood or memory. Though purely legendary, Nepenthe continues to inspire writers, historians, and psychologists, highlighting the universal quest for relief from sorrow and the imaginative ways cultures address the challenges of the human psyche. Automatic doors. In the 1st century AD, Heron of Alexandria built a set of temple doors that opened on their own when a fire was lit outside. Nobody touched them, nobody pulled them, they simply opened. Heron was a Greek mathematician and engineer living in Roman Egypt who spent his life building devices designed to produce wonder in the people who encountered them. The automatic doors were among his most theatrical creations, and they were built with one specific purpose: to convince worshippers entering a temple that they were in the presence of something divine. The system worked entirely through heat and hydraulics. When a priest lit a ceremonial fire on an altar outside the temple, the heat traveled down through pipes into a sealed brass vessel buried beneath the floor. As the air inside expanded, it forced water out of the vessel and up through tubes into a second tank suspended near the ceiling. As that tank filled with water, its increasing weight pulled on a system of ropes and pulleys connected directly to the door pivots. Slowly and silently, the great temple doors swung open as if moved by invisible hands. When the fire was extinguished, the heat dissipated, pressure dropped, and the water drained back down. The counterweights shifted and the doors closed on their own. To a worshipper arriving for prayer and watching two massive doors swing open without a single person touching them, the effect was absolute. It looked like the gods themselves were granting entry. The technology was not rediscovered in practical form until 1931, when the first modern automatic door was installed in the United States nearly 2,000 years later. Every automatic door you walk through today operates on the same fundamental principle Heron documented in the 1st century AD. Pressure builds, weight shifts, and the door moves. Ancient hydraulic mining. In the 1st century AD, Roman engineers demolished entire mountains using nothing but water. No explosives, no heavy machinery, and no technology that anyone believed existed at that scale for another 1,800 years. The site was Las Medullas in northwestern Spain, the largest gold mining operation in the entire Roman Empire. Roman engineers designed a system of at least 7 aqueducts stretching up to 30 miles in length to redirect water from distant mountain streams down to the mining site. Over 400 kilometers of channels carved entirely by hand into solid rock. The technique was called ruina montium, meaning wrecking of mountains. Engineers carved a network of narrow tunnels deep into the base of a mountain, directly beneath the gold-bearing rock above. Those tunnels were connected to the aqueduct system and sealed. Then the sluice gates were opened. Millions of liters of water flooded the tunnels, simultaneously building pressure until the rock above could no longer support its own weight. The mountain collapsed from within. The debris field of gold-bearing soil was then channeled through sluice tables where gold was separated and collected. Over 6.5 tons of gold were extracted from the site every single year for nearly 2 centuries. Pliny the Elder witnessed the operation firsthand and described miners working underground by lamplight for months without seeing daylight and sudden collapses that buried entire crews without warning. The landscape the Romans left behind was so completely transformed, it is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The scarred red mountains of Las Medullas are still visible today, exactly as the Romans left them. Modern hydraulic mining using pressurized water jets was not developed until the California Gold Rush in 1853. The Romans had been doing it at industrial scale nearly 2,000 years earlier. If you enjoyed this video, there are plenty more inventions waiting for you on the channel. Viking sunstone. In the 10th century, Viking navigators were crossing thousands of miles of open North Atlantic Ocean with no magnetic compass, no landmarks, and no visible stars. They reached their destinations with remarkable precision. Norse sagas had long described a mysterious object called a solarstein, a sunstone that could reveal the position of the hidden sun, even on completely overcast days. For centuries, historians treated it as legend. Then scientists started testing the theory and discovered it was not legend at all. The sunstone was a crystal of Iceland spar, a transparent form of calcite found naturally across Scandinavia and Iceland. The crystal possesses a property called birefringence, which splits any light passing through it into two separate beams. When a navigator held the crystal up to the sky and slowly rotated it, the two beams changed in relative brightness as the crystal aligned with the polarization pattern of light scattered across the atmosphere. At the exact point where both beams appeared equally bright, the navigator could calculate precisely where the hidden sun sat behind the clouds. A piece of sky with no visible sun still contained enough scattered ultraviolet light to reveal its exact position to anyone who knew how to read it. In 2011, researchers tested a replica sunstone under fully overcast conditions and located the hidden sun within 1 degree of accuracy. A subsequent simulation of 1,000 Viking voyages between Norway and Greenland found that navigators using the sunstone every 3 hours reached their destination between 92 and 100% of the time, despite heavy cloud cover. The magnetic compass did not arrive in Europe until the 12th century. Viking navigators had already been crossing the North Atlantic for 200 years before it existed. Dead Sea Scrolls. Around 200 BC, a collection of ancient manuscripts was carefully sealed inside clay jars and hidden in a series of caves near the Dead Sea. They sat undiscovered for over 2,000 years. When they were finally found, they contained texts that rewrote the history of two of the world's major religions. The scrolls were discovered between 1946 and 1956 in 11 caves near Qumran in the Judean desert by Bedouin shepherds and archaeologists. The collection contains nearly 1,000 manuscripts written mostly in Hebrew and Aramaic on leather, papyrus, and copper. They include the oldest known surviving copies of every book of the Hebrew Bible, except 2, predating the next oldest known copies by a full 1,000 years. Some scrolls contain books and texts that were never included in any Bible, describing angels, cosmic wars, divine calendars, and apocalyptic events that contradict and expand on the scriptures billions of people read today. A small number were written in a cryptographic script used to conceal texts dealing with mysteries the authors wanted hidden. Nobody has fully decoded all of them. Nobody knows with certainty who wrote the scrolls, who hid them, or why. The most widely accepted theory is that a Jewish sect called the Essenes lived at Qumran and sealed their library in the caves to protect it from the Roman invasion of 70 AD. But recent DNA analysis of the parchment shows the scrolls came from multiple different locations across the region, suggesting they may represent the hidden libraries of several different communities, not one sect. In 2025, AI analysis revealed that some scrolls are up to a century older than previously believed, pushing their origins back further than any scholar had estimated. Over 10% of the collection is still being studied. Every new analysis changes what historians thought they knew. Tap o' Noth. In 1832, antiquarian John Stewart climbed a remote hill in Aberdeenshire, Scotland, to document what local records described as an ancient fortification. He expected crumbled stone walls and overgrown earthworks. What he found near the summit was so unusual that he spent the next 3 years trying to find a geological explanation for it. He never did. This is Tap o' Noth, a hill fort perched 563 meters above sea level in the Grampian Mountains of northeast Scotland, built somewhere around 400 BC, and commanding views across the entire surrounding landscape. From below, it looks unremarkable. But the walls that once ringed this summit are among the most heavily vitrified structures ever documented anywhere on Earth. Here is what makes Tap o' Noth exceptional, even among Scotland's 70-plus vitrified forts. The vitrified wall material here is not patchy or localized. It is continuous, running the full perimeter of the summit, in some sections reaching 2 meters thick of solid fused rock. Geologists who have sampled the material confirm it was subjected to sustained temperatures between 1,000 and 1,200 degrees Celsius across the entire circuit of the fort simultaneously, not section by section, all at once. Experimental archaeologists have attempted to replicate hill fort vitrification by packing timber against stone walls and burning it at maximum intensity. The results consistently produce localized scorching, nothing approaching the continuous deep vitrification documented at Tap o' Noth. To produce what exists on this summit, you need uniform, sustained, extreme heat, applied to the entire structure at the same moment. No ancient fire lighting technique achieves that. No weather phenomenon achieves that. No military tactic in the ancient record achieves that. Tap o' Noth sits quietly in the Aberdeenshire hills today, visited by almost nobody, studied by almost nobody, and explained by absolutely nobody. The most vitrified hill fort on Earth. Hellenic flamethrower. In 424 BC, Greek engineers wheeled a device onto a battlefield that no army in the ancient world had ever encountered before. A machine that projected fire forward under pressure and burned through wooden fortifications that no conventional weapon could touch. The device was built and deployed by the Boeotians during the siege of Delium against an Athenian garrison that had fortified itself inside a temple complex behind heavy wooden walls. Conventional assault had failed. The Boeotians needed something that could reach through or over those walls and destroy them from a distance. The weapon was constructed from a large hollowed-out tree trunk, split lengthwise, scooped out and sealed back together, forming a long, pressurized tube. At the front end hung a cauldron filled with burning charcoal, sulfur, and pitch. At the rear end, a large bellows was fitted and operated by soldiers pumping air continuously forward through the tube. The forced air fed oxygen directly into the burning cauldron, intensifying the combustion and projecting a sustained jet of flame forward at significant pressure. The range was limited to around 5 meters, but at close quarters against wooden walls and fortifications, it was devastating. The Athenian defenses at Delium caught fire and collapsed. The garrison was overrun. The entire account is documented in precise detail by Thucydides in his History of the Peloponnesian War, making it one of the earliest confirmed descriptions of a mechanical fire-projecting weapon in recorded history. The modern flamethrower operates on the same core principle: force pressurized fuel through a nozzle past an ignition point and project the resulting flame forward. The German army formalized this in 1901. The Boeotians had already done it 23 centuries earlier with a hollowed tree trunk and a pair of bellows. Sun compass. In the 11th century, Norse navigators were crossing 1,600 miles of open North Atlantic Ocean with no magnetic compass, no landmarks, and no GPS. They arrived within 4 degrees of their intended destination every single time. The device they used was a small wooden disc, just 7 centimeters across, discovered in 1948 in the ruins of an 11th century convent in Greenland. Known today as the Unertak disc, it was initially dismissed as a decorative object. Researchers later realized it was one of the most sophisticated navigation tools ever built for its size. The disc worked by using a central pin to cast a shadow from the sun onto a series of precisely carved mnemonic lines etched into its face. A navigator would track the shadow throughout the day, and when the tip of the shadow touched the curved reference lines on the disc, the position of true north could be read directly from the markings. 32 directional increments were carved around the outer rim, corresponding exactly to the traditional mariner's compass rose. In field tests, conducted with a replica on a replica Norse merchant ship sailing between Iceland and Greenland, the deviation between the disc and a modern magnetic compass was described as negligible. What made it truly remarkable was what happened after sunset, when used alongside a pair of calcite crystals known as sunstones, which revealed the polarization of ultraviolet light invisible to the naked eye, and a specially shaped wooden shadow stick to simulate where the sun's shadow would fall below the horizon. The disc functioned as a working compass for up to 50 minutes after the sun had completely disappeared. In conditions of total cloud cover and fading light, Viking navigators could still locate true north with 4 degrees of accuracy. Modern researchers at Eötvös University tested the system under real conditions and confirmed it worked. A civilization that predated the magnetic compass in Europe by 2 centuries had already solved the problem in a different way entirely. Trepanation. Dating back as far as 6,500 BCE, trepanation is the practice of drilling or scraping holes into the human skull, performed by ancient cultures across the world. Originally undertaken for medical, ritualistic, or spiritual reasons, it represents one of humanity's earliest surgical interventions, demonstrating both ingenuity and boldness in confronting illness, trauma, or altered states of consciousness. Practitioners use stone tools, obsidian blades, or later metal instruments to carefully remove small sections of the skull, aiming to treat head injuries, relieve pressure, or release supposed evil spirits. Evidence suggests that many patients survived the procedure, as indicated by signs of bone healing, demonstrating remarkable skill and understanding of anatomy for prehistoric and early historic societies. Techniques varied widely. Some cultures scraped gradually, others drilled, and still others used circular cutting methods. Healing was aided by natural antiseptics, careful observation, and supportive care, while the cultural or spiritual context often guided the procedure's timing and method. Anthropologists have found trepanned skulls on multiple continents, showing its widespread use and longevity over millennia. The practice illustrates the intersection of medicine, ritual, and human curiosity. It also provides insight into how early humans experimented with invasive techniques to address physical and mental health challenges long before modern surgical knowledge existed. Though largely abandoned in contemporary medicine, trepanation persists in historical study and rare experimental contexts. It remains a striking testament to the lengths humans have gone to understand and manipulate their own biology, bridging ancient beliefs with the roots of surgical innovation. Malta's hypogeum. Around 4000 BC, a civilization on the island of Malta carved a 3-level underground temple complex into solid limestone by hand, aligned its chambers to the winter solstice, and engineered its acoustics so precisely that a single voice spoken inside still resonates through the entire structure today. The hypogeum, meaning underground in Greek, covers over 1,500 square feet and descends 10 meters below the surface across 3 separate levels. It was carved entirely using tools made from obsidian and deer antlers, with no metal instruments of any kind. The chambers on the middle level were designed to architecturally mirror the above-ground temples built across Malta at the same time, complete with false doorways, corbelled ceilings, and trilithon entrances. Over 7,000 human remains were found inside. What scientists cannot fully explain is the oracle chamber. A niche carved into the wall produces a resonance effect at exactly 110 Hz that travels through every chamber in the complex simultaneously. Research published in 2008 found that exposure to that specific frequency causes measurable changes in brain activity, temporarily shifting the prefrontal cortex from left to right hemisphere dominance and suppressing the language center entirely. The people who built the hypogeum appear to have known this. The chamber was not a natural acoustic accident. It was engineered to that frequency deliberately using nothing but hand-carved stone. The civilization that built it vanished completely around 2500 BC with no known cause. No invasion, no natural disaster, and no migration pattern has ever been confirmed. They simply disappeared. Only 80 visitors are permitted inside each day to protect the microclimate. The red ochre spiral paintings on the walls are the oldest prehistoric paintings ever found in Malta. Whatever rituals took place in those chambers 6,000 years ago have never been fully explained. Mohenjo-Daro. In 1922, Indian archaeologist Rakhaldas Bandyopadhyay was surveying a remote mound in the Sindh province of modern Pakistan, expecting to find a Buddhist stupa. What his excavation revealed instead was one of the most advanced cities ever built by human hands, and one of the most violent endings in the entire archaeological record. A civilization at its peak, and then nothing. This is Mohenjo-Daro, a sophisticated urban center of nearly 40,000 people, built around 2500 BC, with grid-planned streets, indoor plumbing, and multi-story buildings that wouldn't look out of place in a modern city. For 700 years, it thrived as one of the crown jewels of the Indus Valley civilization, and then, around 1900 BC, it ended with a suddenness that archaeologists still cannot fully account for. Here is what the excavation found. Scattered across the uppermost occupation layer, researchers discovered clusters of human skeletons, some still holding hands, some collapsed mid-stride in the streets, showing no signs of warfare, no weapons, no defensive wounds. And embedded throughout the same layer, black glass nodules. Chunks of fused pottery, clay bricks, and street material melted together at temperatures exceeding 1,500 degrees Celsius. British archaeologist Francis Taylor documented streets where the surface material had vitrified in place, not burned, melted. The destruction was so sudden that there was no evidence of evacuation, no evidence of preparation. No evidence that anyone saw it coming. Researcher Davenport and physicist Vincenti published an analysis in 1979 suggesting the pattern of destruction, the epicenter, the concentric rings of decreasing damage, and the vitrified surface material were consistent with an aerial thermal event of extraordinary intensity. The city was never rebuilt. The entire Indus Valley civilization collapsed within a generation. 40,000 people, gone in a moment nobody recorded, and science has never satisfactorily explained. Nimrud lens. In 750 BC, a Syrian craftsman ground a piece of natural rock crystal into a precise oval lens with optical properties that should not have existed for another 2,000 years. Scientists still cannot agree on what it was for. The lens was discovered buried in the throne room of the Northwest Palace of Nimrud in modern-day Iraq. It measures 38 millimeters across and was carefully ground and polished to a convex shape, requiring sophisticated knowledge of optics and considerable technical skill to achieve without modern tools. When held up to the eye, it magnified objects 3 times their actual size, with a focal length of 12 centimeters. When held toward the sun at that same focal length, it concentrated sunlight into a point hot enough to ignite material below. Both functions have been tested and confirmed on the original object. The debate is not whether it worked as a lens. The debate is which of those 2 functions it was primarily built for. 3 theories have been proposed. A magnifying glass for Assyrian craftsmen who regularly produced engravings so small they should have been impossible to create with the naked eye. A burning glass for concentrating sunlight in ceremonial fires. Or part of an ancient telescope, a controversial theory supported by the fact that Assyrian astronomers demonstrated knowledge of astronomical details that should have been impossible to observe without optical magnification. The British Museum has stated its optical properties were most likely accidental, yet the lens fits comfortably in the hand, has consistent curvature, and produces measurable magnification. Accidents of that quality do not happen without intention. It sits in the British Museum today, the oldest known lens in human history, still without an agreed explanation after over a century of study. Axonite poison arrow. Around 1200 BC, armies across India, China, and Greece were coating their arrowheads with a plant so toxic that a single scratch through the skin was enough to stop a human heart. Aconite, known across the ancient world as wolfsbane or monkshood, was considered the most lethal plant ever discovered. Greek mythology described it as the first poison ever created, born from the foam of Cerberus at the gates of hell. Ancient physicians documented it with a mixture of reverence and genuine fear. The preparation process was precise. Chinese warriors boiled the tubers of wild aconite in water until the resulting liquid became thick and highly viscous. The concentrated extract was then applied to arrowheads and allowed to dry into a dark resinous coating invisible to the enemy. The active compound was aconitine, an alkaloid that attacked the nervous system almost immediately upon entering the bloodstream. It began with numbness and burning at the wound site. Within minutes, muscle weakness spread through the limbs. Vomiting and convulsions followed. In high doses, the heart simply stopped. There was no known antidote in the ancient world. The weapon was so feared that the Roman Emperor Trajan banned the cultivation of aconite entirely within Roman territories after repeated cases of political assassination. Ancient Indian texts describe detailed battlefield protocols for treating soldiers wounded by aconite arrows. Most of the treatments did not work. Alexander the Great encountered aconite-tipped arrows during his campaign in India. Roman forces suffered casualties from them during the Third Mithridatic War. The plant was used on weapons across Europe, Asia, and the Americas for over 3,000 years. Today, aconitine remains one of the most toxic naturally occurring substances on Earth. There is still no reliable antidote for a significant dose. Piri Reis map. In 1513, Ottoman Admiral Piri Reis compiled a world map that has fascinated historians and geographers for centuries. The map, drawn on a fragment of gazelle skin parchment, depicts parts of Europe, Africa, and the Americas with remarkable accuracy for its time, including a coastline that some believe represents Antarctica long before its official discovery. Its origins and precision have inspired speculation about lost knowledge, advanced navigation techniques, or ancient sources. Piri Reis combined information from older maps, sailors' charts, and possibly oral accounts to produce his compilation. The map includes latitude and longitude markers, depictions of islands, rivers, and mountains, and detailed coastal outlines. Scholars have noted its surprisingly accurate representation of South America's eastern coastline, raising questions about how explorers in the early 16th century could have gathered such data. Some researchers suggest access to earlier Phoenician or Mediterranean maps, while others propose a combination of observation and estimation by skilled navigators. The Antarctic coastline depiction is highly debated, as it may reflect ice-free regions or misinterpretation of southern territories. The Piri Reis map illustrates the sophistication of early cartography and the blend of art, science, and exploration during the Age of Discovery. It demonstrates how meticulous observation, compilation, and interpretation can yield maps of impressive accuracy, even with limited technology. Its enduring mystery continues to captivate scholars, adventurers, and enthusiasts, highlighting how a single historical artifact can offer insights into navigation, geography, and the transmission of knowledge across centuries. Iron Pillar of Delhi. Around 400 AD, Indian metallurgists forged a 6-ton iron pillar that has been standing in the open air through 1,600 years of monsoons, extreme heat, and humidity without rusting. Modern materials, scientists spent nearly a century trying to explain how. The pillar stands 7 meters tall in the courtyard of the Qutb complex in Delhi and was built during the reign of Chandragupta, the second of the Gupta Empire. It was forge-welded by hand from dozens of individual iron pieces hammered together at high heat, a process that required extraordinary precision to produce a structure of that scale without mechanical equipment of any kind. The secret to its survival was not fully understood until 2003 when researchers at the Indian Institute of Technology in Kanpur published their findings. The iron contained an unusually high phosphorus content of around 1%, over 10 times higher than modern commercial iron. When exposed to atmospheric moisture, that phosphorus reacted with the iron surface to form a thin protective layer of crystalline iron hydrogen phosphate. That layer, just 1/20th of a millimeter thick after 16 centuries of growth, acts as a permanent shield, preventing any further corrosion from reaching the metal beneath. What makes it remarkable is not just that it works. It is that ancient Indian smiths appear to have understood the connection between phosphorus content and corrosion resistance and deliberately selected ore with those specific properties. Without modern chemistry, without laboratory analysis, without any scientific framework that should have made that knowledge possible. A cannonball fired at the pillar during Nadir Shah's invasion in 1739 failed to destroy it. The pillar cracked slightly on the opposite side and remained standing. Today, materials engineers study the pillar as a potential model for developing sustainable corrosion-resistant metals. A technique mastered 1,600 years ago still has lessons for modern industry. Stone spheres of Costa Rica. Around 600 AD, the Diki people of Costa Rica were carving perfectly round stone spheres from solid granodiorite rock, some weighing up to 26 tons, without metal tools, without the wheel, and without any written explanation of why. The Dikis left no written language. Everything we know about the spheres comes from archaeology alone. The spheres were made by hammering natural boulders with other rocks, then polishing them smooth with sand and water. The largest measure nearly 3 meters across and weigh as much as a loaded truck. The rock came from quarries several kilometers away, meaning the builders transported multi-ton stones through dense jungle without wheels or animals strong enough to carry them. The precision of the finished surfaces is extraordinary. Many are so close to perfectly spherical that the deviation from a true sphere is less than the width of a human finger. The spheres were discovered in the 1930s when workers clearing jungle for banana plantations uncovered them buried in the forest floor. Before archaeologists could intervene, workers drilled holes into them, searching for hidden gold, and blew several apart with dynamite. Most were relocated before their original positions could be recorded, making their true purpose nearly impossible to reconstruct. Some remaining spheres have been found aligned with astronomical features, including the position of the sunrise at specific times of year. Beyond that, the purpose and spiritual significance remain entirely unknown. Roman lead sling bullet. In the 2nd century AD, Roman auxiliary troops in Scotland were firing projectiles so small and so fast that enemy soldiers could not see them coming. Some had been drilled with tiny holes specifically designed to make them scream through the air like an incoming swarm. The Roman lead sling bullet, known as the glans plumbea, meaning lead acorn, was the most precisely engineered ranged ammunition of the ancient world. While armies across the Mediterranean were still using river stones, Roman engineers cast lead bullets in two-part molds, producing a consistent almond-shaped projectile roughly 35 millimeters long. Lead was denser than stone, which meant a smaller bullet carried more mass, cut through air resistance more efficiently, and hit harder than anything comparable. A skilled slinger could launch a glans at speeds approaching 160 kilometers per hour, with an effective range exceeding 300 meters. The bullet was nearly invisible in flight. Roman military writer Vegetius recorded that soldiers were more often killed by sling bullets than by arrows because the projectile left no visible wound channel. It drove lethal blunt force trauma deep into bone and organ through armor itself. What made the Roman version uniquely psychological was what was written on them. Recovered bullets bear inscriptions molded directly into the lead. "Take this." "Ouch." "Catch." For Pompey's backside. Roman slingers were delivering taunts at 300 meters before the enemy could respond. The sling disappeared from Western warfare only when firearms arrived. It had been in continuous military use for over 3,000 years. Silphium. Between around 600 BCE and the 1st century CE, the ancient Mediterranean relied on silphium, a highly prized plant used as both a medicine and a contraceptive. Valued for its culinary, medicinal, and practical applications, it became so essential that it was depicted on coins and referenced in trade records, highlighting its economic and cultural significance. Silphium's exact identity remains unknown today, as it became extinct due to overharvesting and possible climate changes. The plant's resin, often called laser or silphium gum, was used to treat ailments ranging from digestive issues to coughs and sore throats. It was also famed for its contraceptive and abortifacient properties, making it highly sought after across Greece, Rome, and neighboring regions. Harvesting was carefully controlled, and the plant's scarcity only increased its value. Ancient texts describe preparation methods, doses, and applications, reflecting sophisticated botanical knowledge and practical experience. The extinction of silphium serves as an early example of how human demand can drive a species to disappearance, particularly when combined with cultivation challenges and environmental pressures. Silphium demonstrates the intersection of medicine, agriculture, and commerce in the ancient world, illustrating how natural resources shape society, economy, and daily life. Its loss underscores the fragility of botanical knowledge and the lasting impact of exploitation. Even centuries later, silphium inspires fascination among historians, botanists, and pharmacologists, symbolizing both human ingenuity and the consequences of unsustainable use of natural resources. Barabar Caves. In 1848, British surveyor Alexander Cunningham ventured into a remote granite outcrop in the Jahanabad district of Bihar, India, to document a series of ancient rock-cut caves. He was expecting primitive shelters. What he found inside stopped him from writing a single confident conclusion for the rest of his career. The walls weren't carved, they were polished to a mirror finish. This is the Barabar Caves complex, a group of 7 rock-cut chambers, the oldest of which date to around 300 BC during the reign of Emperor Ashoka, carved directly into some of the hardest granite on the Indian subcontinent. From the outside, they appear unremarkable. Step inside, and the effect is immediate and deeply unsettling. Every surface, walls, ceilings, floors, reflects light like polished glass. Not smooth stone, not sanded rock. Thermally glazed granite, fused at the surface to a depth that geologists confirm required temperatures exceeding 1,100 degrees Celsius. Here is what makes that impossible. The caves are cut from solid granite, one of the most heat-resistant materials on Earth. Achieving a continuous mirror polish across every internal surface, including the ceiling through any conventional heating method, would require concentrating and sustaining extreme thermal energy uniformly inside a sealed rock chamber with no viable fuel source, no ventilation, and no known ancient technology capable of generating that heat profile. Modern engineers studying the caves have noted the acoustic properties are equally extraordinary. Certain chambers produce near-perfect resonance effects that would require precise geometric calculation to achieve intentionally. Cunningham documented the glazing in detail. He had no explanation, neither did the geologists who followed him, neither does anyone today. Some of the oldest man-made chambers on Earth, every surface fused to glass by a heat source nobody has ever identified. And they still haven't sent anyone back to find out why. Nazca Lines. Around 500 BC, the Nazca people of southern Peru began etching enormous designs into the desert floor that stretched for miles in every direction. The designs are so large they are completely invisible from the ground. Nobody noticed them for over 2,000 years until pilots flew over them in the 1930s and looked down. The Nazca people carved the lines by removing the reddish-brown iron oxide pebbles covering the desert surface to reveal the lighter earth beneath. The site covers nearly 500 square kilometers and contains over 800 straight lines, 300 geometric figures, and 70 animal and plant designs. Some straight lines run for 30 miles without a single deviation. The animal figures include a spider, a hummingbird, a monkey, a whale, a lizard, and a condor. The largest figures stretch over 300 meters from end to end, as long as 3 football fields placed side by side. One humanoid figure with unusual circular eyes has become known as the astronaut. In 2024, artificial intelligence scanning of the region discovered 303 previously unknown geoglyphs that had gone undetected for 2,000 years. The desert receives only 20 minutes of rain per year. That extreme aridity is the only reason the lines survived at all. The mystery is not how they were made. The mystery is why. The figures can only be fully seen and appreciated from the air, a viewpoint the Nazca people never had. Theories range from astronomical calendars to sacred walkways to offerings to gods who were believed to look down from above. No single theory has ever been confirmed. After 80 years of study, the purpose of the Nazca Lines remains one of the most debated questions in all of archaeology. Roman dodecahedron. In the 2nd century AD, Roman craftsmen were producing a small hollow bronze object with 12 pentagonal faces, circular holes of varying sizes, and spherical knobs on every corner. Over 130 of them have been found across Europe. Nobody has any idea what they were for. The objects range from 4 to 11 centimeters in size and were clearly expensive and difficult to produce. Several were found buried in coin hoards, alongside gold and silver, suggesting their owners considered them among their most valuable possessions. They have been discovered in graves, in military outposts, in bathhouses, and on riverbeds across Britain, France, Germany, Hungary, and Switzerland. Not a single one has ever been found in Italy, the heart of the Roman Empire itself. What makes them truly baffling is not just their design, it is the complete silence surrounding them. The Romans documented everything: military manuals, tax records, agricultural guides, philosophical texts. They wrote about tools, games, religious objects, and household items in extraordinary detail. The dodecahedron does not appear in a single surviving Roman text, artwork, or inscription. An object found in over 130 locations across the empire left no written trace whatsoever. Over 50 serious theories have been proposed: astronomical instruments, rangefinders for artillery, knitting tools for making gloves, candle holders, fortune-telling devices, ceremonial scepter tops, children's toys. Every theory has evidence that supports it and evidence that contradicts it. None has ever been confirmed. The most unsettling detail is this: the holes on each face are all different sizes. Nobody has explained why, and until a Roman text surfaces that mentions them directly, nobody ever will. Singing arrows. In 200 BC, a Xiongnu prince fired a single arrow into the sky above his cavalry, and the entire army followed its direction without a single spoken command. The arrow had told them where to go. The arrow was built around a hollow bone or wooden compartment placed directly behind the arrowhead. The compartment was carved with 2 or more oval-shaped holes, and when fired at speed, air rushed through those holes, producing a sharp, high-pitched whistle that carried across an entire battlefield. Different sizes of compartment produced different tones, and different tones meant different commands: attack, retreat, flank left. The arrow did not need to hit anything. It only needed to be heard. The weapon served two purposes simultaneously. Among friendly forces, it was a battlefield signal system, faster and more precise than any runner or drummer. Among enemy forces, it was a psychological instrument. 1,000 whistling arrows fired in a single volley produced a wall of sound that witnesses described as terrifying to both soldiers and horses. Horses in particular were highly sensitive to the pitch and would break formation, throw riders, and scatter under sustained volleys. The first recorded use appears in the records of the Grand Historian, written around 100 BC, describing Xiongnu Prince Modu, using them to train absolute loyalty among his followers. The Mongols, Turks, and Japanese all adopted variations of the design centuries later. Modern acoustic analysis of recovered Mongol whistling arrowheads confirmed they were precision engineered to produce specific frequencies. They were not a side effect of arrow design. They were intentional instruments of war built to be heard. Geopolymer concrete. In the 1970s, chemist Joseph Davidovits introduced geopolymer concrete, a material inspired by ancient construction techniques and designed to offer superior durability and environmental benefits compared to conventional cement. Unlike traditional Portland cement, it uses aluminosilicate powders activated with alkaline solutions, producing a chemically bonded structure that resists heat, chemical corrosion, and cracking. The concept suggested that some ancient structures, including pyramids, might have been cast from early forms of geopolymer concrete rather than carved from stone. The material forms a three-dimensional polymeric network when the powders react with the alkaline activator, creating a dense, cohesive matrix. This reaction releases minimal carbon dioxide, making it a greener alternative to conventional cement production. Engineers have experimented with geopolymers for high-temperature applications, fire-resistant coatings, and marine construction, due to their low permeability and chemical stability. The material's composition can be adjusted for specific structural or aesthetic requirements, and it sets rapidly while maintaining long-term strength. Laboratory analysis has shown that its microstructure closely mimics natural stone in durability and compressive capacity, demonstrating its potential for large-scale infrastructure projects. Today, the material is being explored worldwide for applications in environmentally conscious construction, historical restoration, and extreme condition structures. Its development bridges past ingenuity with future sustainability, making it a key subject for researchers, engineers, and historians alike. Yonaguni Monument. Off the coast of Yonaguni Island lies a massive underwater formation known as the Yonaguni Monument. Discovered in 1986 by a local diver, the structure sits about 25 meters below the surface of the ocean and quickly became one of the most debated underwater sites in the world. The formation features large flat surfaces, sharp edges, and massive step-like terraces that appear to resemble a giant stone pyramid. Some sections look like wide staircases, while others resemble platforms, corridors, and rectangular blocks stacked on top of each other. The entire structure stretches for over 150 meters and rises roughly 27 meters from the seabed. Because of its geometric appearance, some researchers believe the monument could be the remains of an ancient man-made structure that was submerged after sea levels rose thousands of years ago. If this were true, it could suggest the existence of a very old coastal civilization in the region. However, many geologists strongly disagree with this idea. They argue that the formation is a natural rock structure created by tectonic activity and erosion. The sandstone in the area naturally fractures into straight lines and flat surfaces, which can produce shapes that appear artificial. Another mystery is the presence of what some claim to be carved features, including shapes that resemble pillars, arches, and even faces. Supporters of the ancient structure theory believe these details indicate human modification. Despite decades of study, there is still no clear agreement about the true origin of the Yonaguni Monument. Some experts see it as a natural geological formation, while others continue to explore the possibility that it may contain traces of ancient human construction. Today, the Yonaguni Monument remains one of the most mysterious underwater formations ever discovered, leaving scientists divided over whether it is a remarkable natural structure or the possible remains of a lost ancient site. Libyan desert glass. In 1932, British geologist Patrick Clayton was driving a survey vehicle across the Great Sand Sea in the southwestern corner of Egypt, mapping one of the most remote and hostile stretches of desert on Earth. There were no ruins out here, no ancient settlements, no reason for anything unusual to exist in this particular expanse of lifeless sand. And then, his wheels began crunching over glass. Not fragments, not scattered shards. Thousands of tons of pale yellow-green glass, scattered across a field, roughly 6,000 square kilometers in size, sitting on the surface of the desert as though placed there deliberately. Pieces ranging from small nodules to slabs weighing over 10 kilograms. Clayton collected samples, filed his report, and triggered a geological mystery that remains unsolved nearly a century later. This is Libyan desert glass. At 28 million years old, it is among the oldest silica glass on Earth, and it formed in one of the most geologically inactive regions on the planet. No volcanic activity, no tectonic event, no conventional geological process that operates in this region produces silica glass of this purity, this volume, or across this spatial extent. Here is what the analysis shows. The glass contains traces of iridium, a metal rare on Earth but abundant in cosmic bodies. It contains refractory minerals that only form under extreme pressure and temperature simultaneously, and its chemical composition is consistent with material that was flash heated to temperatures exceeding 1,800 degrees Celsius across the entire 6,000 square kilometer field, essentially instantaneously. King Tutankhamun's tomb contained a carved scarab beetle made from Libyan desert glass. The Egyptians clearly considered it sacred, extraordinary, something to be worn by a pharaoh into the afterlife. 28 million years old, 6,000 square kilometers, flash heated to 1,800 degrees in an instant. Whatever created it has never been formally agreed upon, and the desert offers no further clues. Damascus steel. Around 300 BC, Indian metallurgists created a steel so far beyond anything else in the ancient world that modern scientists with electron microscopes and nanotechnology still cannot fully explain how it was made. Wootz steel originated in southern India, where iron ore with unusually high carbon content was melted in sealed clay crucibles along with plant matter and specific trace minerals. As the mixture cooled slowly over days, carbon separated into microscopic bands, creating an internal structure no other process could replicate. What made it unlike any other steel was that it combined two properties that should not coexist: hard enough to hold a razor-sharp edge through repeated combat, and flexible enough to bend without shattering. European steel of the same era was brittle, lost its edge quickly, and broke under sustained impact. One of the most repeated accounts describes a Damascus blade slicing a silk scarf dropped across its edge purely under the weight of the fabric. Then around 1750, the knowledge vanished within a single generation. The specific ore deposits in India providing the trace minerals critical to the process were exhausted. Without those precise impurities, the steel could not be reproduced regardless of technique. In 2006, scientists at Dresden University discovered carbon nanotubes inside a genuine Damascus blade. Nanostructures that modern science only identified in the 20th century had been forming naturally inside these swords for 2,000 years. Nobody knew they were there. No laboratory has successfully reproduced a blade matching the mechanical properties of the originals. The formula has been partially decoded. The result has never been fully replicated. Chinese magic mirrors. Between 200 BCE and 24 CE, the Han Dynasty produced bronze mirrors with hidden optical properties. These mirrors appear ordinary, with a reflective front and decorative back. When sunlight reflects onto a wall, the pattern from the back becomes visible. This occurs because the casting process creates tiny thickness variations. During polishing, thinner areas flex more, generating nanometer-scale bumps on the front. Light scatters differently across these bumps, projecting the back's pattern. This is an early form of optical projection. Artisans controlled curvature at a microscopic scale, creating consistent results across mirrors. Western scientists in the 1800s could not replicate the effect. Modern replication shows the mirrors required precise casting and polishing techniques. Craig Fadrig. In 1880, a Scottish surveyor named Patrick Chalmers climbed a forested hill overlooking Inverness, expecting nothing more than a routine Iron Age earthwork. What he found at the top made him question everything he knew about the ancient world. The walls weren't just old, they were glazed. This is Craig Fadrig, a hill fort built around 400 BC, high above the Scottish Highlands, where the ancient Picts once commanded the landscape for miles. From a distance, it looks like any other overgrown ruin, but walk up to the ramparts and something is deeply wrong. The granite hasn't simply weathered or crumbled, it has been fused, melted into a single continuous mass of vitrified rock, as though the entire wall was once liquid. Here is where science becomes difficult to dismiss. Vitrifying granite requires sustained temperatures between 1050 and 1235 degrees Celsius. A timber fire burning against stone, even a large one, cannot concentrate or sustain heat anywhere near that threshold. 19th century geologists who examined Craig Fadrig and dozens of similar forts across Scotland concluded the same thing. The vitrification was real, massive in scale, and thermally impossible to explain with any conventional fire source. And Craig Fadrig is not alone. Over 70 vitrified hill forts have been documented across Scotland. The same fused walls, the same impossible temperatures. Some researchers propose the walls were intentionally fired to strengthen them. But laboratory reconstructions have repeatedly failed to reproduce vitrification at this scale. And structural analysis shows the melting actually weakens the walls, not reinforces them. So, it wasn't construction, it wasn't an accident, and it wasn't any fire that history has a name for. 70 sites, the same phenomenon. Not a single published explanation that holds up to scrutiny. Whatever burned these walls moved across an entire country, and nobody knows what it was. Esithid chariot. In 401 BC, Persian forces unleashed a weapon at the Battle of Cunaxa that no Greek soldier had encountered before. A war chariot fitted with razor-sharp bronze blades extending 1 meter from each wheel, designed to cut through infantry formations at full gallop. The scythe chariot was developed by the Persian Achaemenid Empire as a direct response to the effectiveness of Greek heavy infantry. Standard cavalry struggled to penetrate a disciplined phalanx. The scythe chariot was designed to solve that problem by force. The vehicle was pulled by 4 armored horses. Bronze scythes extended horizontally from both wheel axles, cutting at leg height. Additional blades projected forward from the yoke poles and downward from beneath the chariot floor. At full gallop, the entire machine became a spinning wall of blades covering every angle of approach. Witnesses described formations being cut apart and soldiers scattered before they could react. The psychological effect was often more devastating than the physical damage. Entire formations broke and fled at the sight of scythe chariots bearing down at speed. At the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC, Darius III deployed 200 of them against Alexander the Great. Alexander had prepared his infantry to open their ranks and let the chariots pass through harmlessly. They were then surrounded from behind and destroyed. It was the last time they were used effectively in a major engagement. Disciplined armies learned that simply opening ranks neutralized them entirely, and by the 1st century BC, the weapon had disappeared from warfare. Yak Chal. In 400 BC, Persian engineers were producing and storing ice in the middle of one of the hottest deserts on Earth, with no electricity, no modern coolants, and no mechanical refrigeration of any kind. The Yakchal, meaning ice pit in Persian, was built across the arid desert regions of what is now Iran during the Achaemenid Empire. In a landscape where summer temperatures regularly exceeded 40 degrees Celsius, communities needed a reliable way to preserve food and store ice through the brutal summer months. What Persian engineers designed to solve that problem was so structurally sophisticated that many of the buildings they constructed still stand today, over 2,400 years later. The structure rose up to 18 meters above ground in a massive dome shape, and descended into an underground storage chamber as large as 5,000 cubic meters. The walls were built from a unique mortar called sarouj, a precise mixture of sand, clay, egg whites, lime, goat hair, and ash that was completely waterproof and highly resistant to heat transfer. Hot air rose to the top and escaped through small openings at the peak, while cold air sank and collected in the underground chamber below. Tall wind catchers funneled additional cool air inward while expelling warm air outward. Water channeled through underground aqueducts filled shallow pools around the base, where cold desert nights froze it into solid ice overnight. That ice remained frozen throughout the entire summer. The ice was not reserved for royalty. Ordinary people bought it in markets across major Persian cities and used it to preserve food, chill drinks, and make a frozen dessert called falude that is still eaten in Iran today. Modern architects and sustainability engineers now study the Yakchal as a model for passive cooling in extreme climates. Buildings in the Middle East are currently being constructed using the same principles with no electricity required. Sacsay Huaman. In 1534, Spanish conquistador Pedro Sancho de la Hoz climbed the hills above Cusco, Peru, and stood before a fortress so immense, so precisely constructed, that he wrote back to the Spanish crown, insisting no human force he had ever encountered could have built it. His superiors assumed he was exaggerating. He wasn't. This is Sacsay Huaman, a colossal ceremonial fortress built by the Inca, high above the city of Cusco, constructed from limestone blocks weighing up to 200 tons each, fitted together with tolerances so tight that not even a sheet of paper can be slid between them. No mortar, no machinery by conventional historical standards, and no satisfying explanation for how stones of that mass were moved and placed with that precision. But it isn't the construction that keeps researchers awake at night. It is the walls themselves. Scattered across specific sections of Sacsay Huaman, particularly along the lower and mid-level ramparts, researchers have documented patches of vitrified stone, limestone and andesite surfaces fused and glazed, as though subjected to sustained, directed heat of extraordinary intensity. Not weathering, not erosion, vitrification, the same thermal signature found at ancient sites across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. Here is the problem for conventional archaeology. Vitrifying dense andesite requires temperatures exceeding 1,100 degrees Celsius. No ancient Andean fire source, no timber burning, no known ceremonial practice produces heat at that threshold across stone walls of this mass. Peruvian researchers who have examined the glazed sections confirm the vitrification is genuine and predates the Spanish conquest by centuries. Inca oral traditions describe a period of catastrophic fire from the sky that struck the highlands and reshaped the landscape permanently. The glazed sections remain on the walls today, untested by any formal published study. No explanation on record. A fortress built to last forever, marked by a fire that nobody can name. Cretan bow. Around 500 BC, every major empire in the Mediterranean, from Persia to Macedonia to Rome, was paying to have the same soldiers in their army. Not their own men. Cretans. Cretan archers had been training with the bows since childhood, on an island where archery was woven into daily life through hunting, competition, and constant intercity warfare. By the time the classical world needed professional ranged troops, there was simply nobody better. The bow itself was a composite weapon built from a wooden core, laminated with layers of animal horn on the belly and sinew on the back. Horn resists compression, while sinew resists tension, and together they stored far more energy than a simple wooden bow of the same size. The tips curved sharply outward, giving the weapon its distinctive shape and maximizing the release of stored energy into the arrow. The arrowheads were heavy triangular iron spikes designed specifically to penetrate bronze and leather armor, at distances other archers could not reach. Effective range was close to 200 meters, nearly double that of standard infantry bows of the same era. Alexander the Great brought 2,500 Cretan archers with him on his campaign from Greece to India. Roman commanders during the Punic Wars hired them as auxiliaries because Roman legions had no equivalent range capability. During the retreat of the 10,000 cut off from supplies deep in Persian territory, Cretan archers gathered spent Persian arrows from the battlefield and fired them back. They were so effective that Persian cavalry refused to engage them directly. The composite bow design the Cretans perfected remained the dominant range weapon technology for over 2,000 years. Camp d'Eperon. In 1879, French geologist Albert de Lapeyron was conducting a routine survey of prehistoric earthworks in the Burgundy region of eastern France when a local farmer directed him toward a hilltop enclosure that the surrounding villages had avoided for generations. The locals had a name for it. They called it the Burnt Mountain. De Lapparent climbed it and immediately understood why. This is Camp des Perrons, a prehistoric hill fort occupying a commanding ridge in the Côte d'Or department of France, built somewhere around 700 BC, and encircled by ramparts that should, by every geological expectation, consist of stacked granite and compacted earth. Instead, de Lapparent found something that contradicted every assumption he had brought with him to the site. The granite was boiled, not melted in the conventional sense, not simply vitrified on the surface. The rampart material at Camp des Perrons shows evidence of having been subjected to temperatures so extreme that the granite itself bubbled. Gas pockets and voids are preserved inside the solidified wall material, the physical signature of rock that reached a gaseous state before cooling. Geologists who have sampled the material confirm that producing this effect in granite requires temperatures exceeding 1,700 degrees Celsius. For context, that is hotter than the surface of some stars. No ancient fire source achieves 1,700 degrees. No siege weapon in the prehistoric European arsenal generates sustained heat at that threshold. No lightning strike maintains the duration required to boil solid rock. De Lapparent documented the anomaly in detail and openly admitted in his published report that he had no explanation. French archaeological literature has largely ignored Camp des Perrons since, a prehistoric hill fort in the quiet French countryside, with walls that were boiled by something ancient and unnamed. Documented once, never formally investigated again. Whatever came here ran hotter than almost anything else in the ancient record. Purple gold. Between roughly 500 to 1500 CE, civilizations in the pre-Columbian Americas developed purple gold, a metal alloy also known as tumbaga, combining gold and copper. The resulting material exhibited a distinctive reddish-purple hue and higher hardness than pure gold, allowing artisans to craft intricate jewelry, ceremonial items, and decorative artifacts that retain luster while resisting wear. Archaeological discoveries show finely detailed figures, headdresses, and ornaments made with this alloy, many preserved in museum collections. The process involved melting gold with copper in precise ratios. Copper altered the color and mechanical properties, while surface depletion techniques could enhance gold content on visible surfaces through repeated heating and chemical treatment, producing a striking visual effect. By carefully controlling temperature, composition, and finishing, artisans achieved both vibrant color and malleability, allowing for thin sheets, elaborate, filigree, and embossed designs without cracking or deforming. Purple gold held both material and symbolic significance. Its color distinguished elite objects from common metals, reinforcing social hierarchy and spiritual authority. The alloy's durability ensured that ceremonial and high-status items survived longer, and the aesthetic appeal impressed both local communities and later European explorers. Despite its sophistication, the exact metallurgical techniques were eventually lost or altered due to European colonization, resulting in partial disappearance of the knowledge. Modern metallurgists can reproduce similar alloys, but the traditional methods and nuanced artistry remain partly mysterious. Purple gold stands as a testament to early metallurgical innovation in the Americas, blending utility, aesthetics, and social symbolism in a material that bridged science and culture. The Inca obsidian mirrors. In 1400 CE, high in the Andes, the Inca Empire controlled vast territory with no written language and no horses. They polished volcanic obsidian into flat circular mirrors, which were not for vanity, but served practical and ceremonial purposes. These mirrors could reflect light across mountain valleys, acting as long-distance signaling devices. By aligning mirrors between peaks, a flash could be seen dozens of miles away, allowing messages to travel faster than runners. Some mirrors were concave and ground to precise focal points, forming acoustic couplers. Whispering into one mirror would project the sound to the focal point of a second mirror hundreds of feet away. This allowed secure long-distance communication that seemed almost supernatural. The Inca combined optical and acoustic technology, giving the Inca the ability to observe, transmit, and monitor their empire efficiently, demonstrating an advanced understanding of physics and engineering. The Dendera light. In 50 BCE, In the Hathor Temple at Dendera, Egypt, reliefs depict a bulb-like object suspended from the ceiling, connected to a lotus flower and a snake. These carvings have been interpreted by some as representing ancient electrical technology. Archaeologists traditionally classify them as symbolic depictions of Egyptian mythology, but the shapes resemble components of a modern electrical lamp. Some researchers suggest the bulb contains a filament-like object inside a tubular vessel, possibly a hollow clay tube acting as a containment vessel. The lotus may represent a power source, and the snake could symbolize a conductor or current flow. While controversial, experiments demonstrate that the structure could theoretically function as a low-voltage gas discharge lamp, implying ancient Egyptians may have observed or experimented with forms of electricity far earlier than commonly believed. The Dogon star knowledge. In the 1400s to 1500 CE in Mali, the Dogon tribe maintained precise astronomical knowledge for centuries without telescopes. They described Sirius as having a small, dense companion star called Po, invisible to the naked eye, orbiting every 50 years. French anthropologists Marcel Griol and Germain Dieterlen documented that the Dogon depicted Po's elliptical orbit accurately, matching modern astronomy. The tribe's rituals, such as the Sigi dance every 60 years, celebrated this orbital pattern. They also recognized the companion star's extreme density, equivalent to a white dwarf, long before Western scientists measured these phenomena. This suggests the Dogon observed celestial bodies using empirical methods or inherited knowledge passed through generations, preserving information that modern science only confirmed in the 20th century. The Baghdad Battery. Around 200 BCE, a ceramic vessel from the Parthian period functioned as a primitive electrical cell. The container holds a copper cylinder, insulated from an iron rod by a layer of asphalt. When filled with an acidic liquid, a chemical reaction produces an electrical potential as electrons move between the two metals. Replicated versions generate measurable voltage. This configuration follows the principles of a galvanic cell. The insulation prevents short-circuiting, and the metal pairing is optimized for sustained electron flow rather than storage. Experimental reconstructions demonstrate the device can perform electroplating, explaining ancient metal artifacts coated with uniform layers too thin to be mechanically applied. The voltage output increases when multiple vessels are connected in series, allowing sustained current over longer periods. Scythian wrote arrows. In the 7th century BC, Scythian warriors were already winning battles before a single arrow landed. The smell of what was coming was enough to make enemy soldiers break formation. The Scythians were nomadic warriors from the Eurasian steppes who fought on horseback, and whose military reputation stretched from China to the Black Sea. Their composite bow was already one of the most powerful ranged weapons of the ancient world. What they put on the tips made it something far worse. The poison was called Scythicon, and the process of making it took months. Shamans collected decomposed viper bodies and their extracted venom, then combined them with human blood and animal feces in sealed vessels buried underground until the entire mixture had fully putrefied. The resulting substance was applied to arrowheads and allowed to dry. A scratch was enough. Within hours, tissue around the wound began to die. Swelling spread through the limbs. Vomiting and convulsions followed. Gangrene set in within 2 days. Tetanus followed shortly after. Survivors were recorded in ancient sources as exceptions. The Scythians did not keep the formula secret. Ancient Greek historians documented the ingredients in precise detail, suggesting the Scythians advertised it deliberately to maximize psychological impact. Facing arrows carried a guaranteed death sentence did something to a soldier's nerve that no conventional weapon could replicate. Modern forensic analysis confirmed that the putrefied mixture contained precisely the bacteria ancient accounts describe. Tetanus and gangrene caused organisms that behaved exactly as historical sources recorded. The word toxic derives from the ancient Greek word for the Scythian poison arrow. Every time that word is used in modern medicine, the Scythians are still there.